Hello everyone and welcome to Sabre Virtual Demo. Our brief videos explain different features of Business Central and the related products. In this video, we're going to look at the planning worksheet and a little bit around the planning system, planning setups, calculating a plan, carrying out those action messages, and then fine-tuning. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at the planning basics. So we want to look at the item card and the planning parameters that are going to actually let Business Central know this is a part that we want the planning worksheet and the requisition worksheet to recognize. So here we are inside of Business Central. The first thing that I'm going to do is navigate to my items list. I can select any item here, and I'm going to scroll down to my replenishment fast tab. And the first thing that I like to validate is my replenishment system. And this becomes really important because if you're using the requisition worksheet, then its functionality only looks at items that are marked as being purchased. So if you've got a purchased item that's marked as being production, transfer, or assembly, then the requisition worksheet, even though you've got planning parameters set up, will ignore that item. If you're using the planning worksheet, then Business Central looks at purchased items, produced items, items that are set up to be a transfer, or assembly items. So in looking at the demand for specific items, it could suggest for you to create new supply orders. And if an item is set up to being purchased but really needs to be produced, it will then, when you carry out, create a purchase order as opposed to a production order. So again, the replenishment system and how you supply this specific item becomes important on this card. The other things I like to have populated, especially if my replenishment system is purchased, is my vendor number and vendor item number. So on the planning and the requisition worksheets, when this item is suggested that I need to create a new purchase order, planning or requisition worksheet will know which vendor is my primary vendor, and it will already default in. Now, we'll explore this a little bit later. I can always deviate from the primary vendor, but this gives my system a starting point. Again, if using the planning worksheet and I've got a prod order or production order replenishment system set up, then some key fields are going to be routing number and production BOM number so that when it creates a firm planned production order, it knows which routing and which bill of material it should use to supply this order. And again, you can always deviate from the master record later, but this gives it the starting point. The other key things are on your planning tab. So these fields on the planning tab are going to drive the rules essentially that are on your requisition and your planning worksheet. So the first key thing is going to be your reordering policy. So if it's left as being blank, then the system will ignore the item in terms of planning. So the requisition worksheet, the planning worksheet, they will not even consider or try to plan for this item. So that might be common for items you have set up for customer supplied material or things that are a Kanban. You're just using, a visual pull system and some other way to track when purchases need to be created for them. It could also be for things like nuts and bolts or consumable type items that you're not really doing perpetual inventory on. So in some cases, it's very likely and appropriate that you would not have a reordering policy set for some of your items. So that leaves us with fixed reorder, maximum quantity, order, and lot for lot. So with fixed reorder, at a minimum, it's going to look at the order quantity and make sure that it equals your reorder quantity. So you can increase this to meet the demand of the desired inventory level, and it's usually used with a reorder point. So you're setting at what reorder point or projected available inventory you want the system to then trigger a new order. When you have maximum, the order quantity is going to be calculated to meet whatever quantity you've set in your maximum inventory. Under order, the order quantity is just going to be calculated to meet whatever demand event was triggering. So for example, if you have a sales order for 10, it's going to tell you to create a supply order for 10 for that exact date, for that exact quantity. So it's not going to look at what you have on hand or what you need for safety stock. And basically no other planning parameters are going to be considered in that event. So minimums, maximums, things like that. Lot for lot is typically the most popular option that people that are new to planning will use. It's got a lot of flexibility behind it. It gives the ability to be able to set a lot accumulation period. So if you wanted to combine multiple demand dates and quantities into one suggestion over a period of time, you could do that. It also looks at what you have on hand in that location, what you need for safety stock, and it considers that in suggestions as well as using some other order modifiers. So there are lots of other fields on the planning card that will help with better suggestions, will help with minimizing messages, and we'll explore those in a little bit. So the next area that we want to explore is running your requisition worksheet or your planning worksheet plan so that the system can look at your items, look at the supply and demand inside of the system, and generate suggestions for you. So what we'll do is we'll jump back into Business Central and we'll calculate a planning worksheet plan. So what I will do is I'm going to navigate to my planning worksheet. So again, the planning worksheet is when you're running a plan for produced items, assembled items, transfer orders, and for purchased items. When running the requisition worksheet, again, it only looks at purchased items. So the first thing that I want to do is using my prepare, calculate, regenerative plan, I'm going to run my planning worksheet. So I'm presented here with an options and filter page, so I can choose whether or not I want to run my master production schedule and my material requirements planning individually or together. So that's a setup that I can actually force users to run them separately if that's my business rule. The starting date should typically be your current date. You want the system to look at your projected available numbers, your on-hand inventory, your dates as of today's date. So the starting date being the current date is often something that gets missed or doesn't get used properly, and then they can't understand the suggestions given. Your ending date is typically as long as your longest lead time, and then about a week, and that makes sure that you capture everything with the starting date that's as long as your lead times. The system has forecast capabilities, and the planning can look at that and consider that in its suggestions. You can filter to just look at specific items or specific locations. For the purposes of this example, I'm going to run this wide open, but when you're looking at piloting this through, doing testing and doing planning, a lot of the times filtering on one item and getting all of its setups and understanding its suggestions first before you roll it out to a bunch of items is common, so you would have that capability. So the system is now looking through all of my demand, all of my supply, my dates, my inventory, and for all of the different levels from 0 all the way through to my lowest level, it's creating planned orders or suggestions based on what it thinks I need to do. So now that we have our planning run, we've got this grid and it's got lots of suggestions, the next thing you're really going to want to be focused on is understanding the plan, understanding the suggestions it's given to you, and understanding how those different suggestions have come to be. So this often takes a lot of piloting, a lot of planning, a lot of updating dates and item cards and rerunning the plan to make sure that you really understand how these suggestions are coming to be. So again, let's just jump back into our Business Central and take a look at some of this. So as you can see here, the system will do emergencies, attentions, or no warning at all. So when you do not have a warning, it's typically telling you, I don't see an issue. You're not late, you have no dates that are in the past, you have no projected available inventories that are less than what you need. Emergency orders you can see, and if you look in your untracked planning events, you can see why it's classifying it as an emergency. So those are often driven by your dates. It's driven by negative inventory. It can be driven by safety stocks. These kind of allow you to be able to focus on the more important or critical items first. You can see here from the action messages that the planning worksheet can tell you to create new. So that means it's going to tell you to create a new purchase order, production order, assembly order. It could tell you to change the quantity. So this means you have an existing order that's out there, but it thinks that the quantity needs to be adjusted. reschedule, which means that you have an existing order out there, but it thinks that your date is incorrect. You either need to move it in or out. You've got reschedule and change quantity, which means that you could possibly need to change, or that you do need to change your date and your quantity, or the system can tell you to cancel. So in that case, it may be looking at an order that you have and entirely thinking that it's not needed. You can see here that the system is letting you know if you had a change quantity. You can see here in your quantity what the original quantity is, or the quantity that it thinks you need. If we saw here a change quantity, we would be able to then see the original quantity that it wants to change from. Same thing on our reschedules. So this is the due date that the system believes we need to meet. If we had a reschedule, it would tell us the original date that it will be changing it from. System can tell you if it's an MPS or an MRP order. It's giving additional information like, is this going to create a purchase order? Is this going to update or reschedule a production or assembly order? If it's a planned order, so it means that it isn't an actual, firmed assembly order or firmed production order, it lets you know that. If you've got the scenario where it's telling you to, in this scenario, it wants us to change the quantity, it lets us know the reference order. So we know exactly which purchase order or assembly or production order is going to be updated on our behalf. So what a user would do is they can filter this list, they can focus on items, they're going to run through these, and they're going to validate what the system is telling them and why. So in this case, if I look at this first item here, it's telling me that this is an emergency order. So if I want to drill into the supply and demand and see the exact orders, one of the key things that I like to use is my item availability by event. So I like to use item availability by event because it really breaks out the different documents that are driving my numbers. So I can see here for the location red, which is on my planning line, that currently on hand, I'm actually in a negative state. So this is interesting, and I like to show this because it shows that it's not just sales orders or production orders or transaction documents that are going to drive demand suggestions in your system. It could also be if you've got a negative or you've got a safety stock. So it is important to make sure that you're maintaining safety stocks, you're maintaining your forecasts. It's important to make sure that if you are allowing your system to have items go into a negative state, that you're quickly resolving those negatives so that it's not telling you to create supply orders. Likely in those scenarios, you need to just transfer inventory from one location to another, or maybe you're behind doing purchase receipts or doing your production orders and outputting them. So negatives sometimes are necessary in manufacturing, but they should quickly be resolved so that they are brought out of that negative state. Because again, you can see that it will drive the planning system to have you supply that. Okay? So with my item availability by event, I can see here that there is a plan for me to create a new assembly order. I can see here that it's telling me to create a new assembly order for one, and that's likely because of my negative. So upon reviewing these lines, I can make changes if I need to. So for example, on this first line here, the system thinks that I should be replenishing for a quantity of 1. Well, I could choose to, if I want, increase that so that I can actually create an assembly order for a little bit more. I could, if I choose to. This says that I need this for 2/28. Well, that's in the past. So maybe what I want to do is I want to push this out to a future date. As I mentioned, if you've got a purchased item, if you've got the vendor that's been associated to the item card, you could deviate and select a different vendor. There's lots of different things that you can do in these screens before you carry out, but ultimately what this is this is a suggestion for you. So this is Business Central looking at your supply and demand, looking at the planning parameters that you've set up, and it's done its best guess to suggest for you how it thinks you should satisfy that demand in your system. So once you've reviewed the system is given a carry out action messages function so that it will actually, in your system, go create purchase orders, create production orders, reschedule or change quantities, or cancel existing orders. So what you need to do is just accept the action message on the line and then carry it out on the planning worksheet. So again, we're back in our planning worksheet here. So you'll notice that the accept action message automatically defaults as enabled for any of the lines without a warning. So that's Business Central saying, look, I think that your due date is in good time, your quantities are okay, so there's nothing really major to look at. So by default, it thinks that you're probably just going to do a quick review of those lines and carry out. Because these lines have an emergency warning message, it's not automatically enabled. So by enabling those lines, it's just your validation as a user to say, I've reviewed these lines, I understand, I know why it's driving, and I want to go ahead and execute those. So under process, you will carry out action message, and this will only create new supply orders or update existing supply orders based on any of the lines where the accept action message is enabled. So what I'm doing in this page here is I'm indicating for any of the lines that are set to prod order, what do I want to do? So it's most common that you're going to use firm planned. People tend to print them, down the line. Under assembly order, you're going to indicate here again, do you want me to just create the assembly orders inside of Business Central, or do you also want me to print? Purchase orders. So you have a little bit more options here. So you could have the system just create the purchase orders. It could create the purchase orders in print, or you could actually copy these to a requisition worksheet. So that's common if you have a master planner who's just reviewing the demand, reviewing the supply orders, but then you may have a purchasing agent or a purchasing clerk who's just going to go ahead and create and send those purchase orders. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and make purchase orders. Once these are set up, and you can do them all together, or you can leave blank any that you're unsure of, and then it just will essentially get skipped. Once you're good to go, you're just going to select OK. So I can see there, the system is looking at all of the lines where accept action message was enabled. It went through line by line, and it carried out and created based on the line messages that were given. So this creates the orders. In the example of, say, purchase orders, you would still want to navigate to your purchase order list and send that to the vendor. So this doesn't send the purchase order via email or anything like that. It would just create them in your system. So as you start using the planning and requisition worksheets more and more, you might find that you want to start introducing additional fields that maybe you didn't turn on in the beginning so that you can fine-tune some of the setups. So in the previous example, as I showed you guys, I changed the quantity and I changed the date. Well, the system by design always wants you to buy what you need when you need it. And unless you tell the system that it's okay to buy a little bit more or a little bit early or any other planning parameters, then the system could come back and tell you that you need to, change the quantity or reschedule. And sometimes those changes are so small, you wouldn't actually want to do that. So let's jump back into BC and explore that a little bit. So as I mentioned, piloting and kind of focusing on your plan and then changing planning setups is a really great way to kind of dig into your suggestions and understanding your fields. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate my plan, and let's just see what it suggests for us. And then what we're going to do is we're going to carry out an action message, and then we'll change some dates, change some quantities, and then rerun it again. So for example, let's take the touring bicycle. So it thinks that we need to have it produced by 5:10. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, I'd like to create the production order for just 5:06. And what I'll do is I'm actually just going to filter to this one part. We kind of use this for our scenario testing. Again, through the pilot, when I'm kind of checking to make sure planning setups are doing what I think they should, I tend to focus on one item so that I'm really comfortable with all the ins and outs. So what I'm going to do is I am going to carry out and I'm going to create that order. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my plan again. So now what I've done is I have deferred, or I have changed the date that the system thinks I should run that part. And again, so that it doesn't take forever to run, I'm going to focus in and filter just on the bike. Okay, so the system is telling me that I should cancel my existing order and create a new one for 5/10, which is what my sales order thinks I should be delivering it by. So I might look at this and say, well, that's insane. I don't really want to create a new order. If I've got something there already, I'll just reschedule my existing order. So I'm going to jump into the item card. I'm going to scroll down to my planning, and I'm going to put on a rescheduling period of 1 week. So what I'm telling the system is I'm saying if my date's within 1 week, give me a reschedule action message as opposed to a cancel and new. So again, I'm going to delete the line that's here, and I'm going to run my plan. And again, I'm just going to focus on the touring bicycle so it doesn't take forever to run. And now we can see that the suggestion is for us to just reschedule our date. Okay. So what I could choose to do is obviously carry that out. Let's say in that I say, well, if I'm going to reschedule it, I'm going to make a little bit more. I'm going to make 5 as opposed to making 4, which is what I'm being suggested to do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to carry out that action. Okay, so now if I run my worksheet again, well, now the system's popping up and it's telling me that I should change the quantity because I haven't told it that I want to make more. I haven't said that it's acceptable if I want to make more. So again, if you're going to have planners who might look at an order and say, I want to make a little bit more, and that's okay, then you might want to set up what's called a dampener quantity. So I'm going to jump into my item card. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to set up a dampener quantity that says it's okay for me to produce up to 2 more of the touring bicycles than my demand needs. So here, I'm going to run for the same parameters. So now that planning worksheet suggestion has gone away. So an important thing to note with your dampeners, whether it be quantity or period, is that the planning will only allow you to produce early or produce more based on the threshold. If you're changing quantities and changing dates to be less than what you need or later than what you need, the system is going to ignore those dampeners because you'll be in a trouble situation. So jumping into the item card, in fine-tuning those setups, there's other fields that can become really helpful as well. So things like a minimum, maximum order multiple are really helpful in purchasing. So for example, if your system thinks that you need to buy 10, you might say, well, if I buy 50, I'm going to get a purchase break, or maybe just from a purchasing standpoint, it makes more sense. Or from a production standpoint, you might say, well, I'm never going to produce, less than 10 at a time, so I want the system to recognize that. You could set up different things like the minimums, maximums, order multiple. So these are different fields and areas that can fine-tune, like I said, these setups. So what I would recommend is engaging in a training session with your consultant or looking online to the documentation, reading through what each of these fields can offer you. And then again, in your pilot company, going through and turn on some of these parameters, run for a specific item, make sure you understand your supply and demand, and just see how it affects your suggestions that you're getting. Okay. As I already mentioned, there's certain fields on the Planning Fast tab that will help to minimize messages. So again, if you're finding you're getting lots of lines that are just for small changes or telling you to cancel orders instead of create new ones, or you're getting a lot of different lines for demand, there's a few fields that are really helpful for minimizing that. So some of those key fields we already talked about. So our dampener period, dampener quantity. Another one, if we're using lot for lot, is your lot accumulation period. So again, if you've got demand on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, You might say, well, that doesn't really make sense that I would create supply orders for those individual days. You would just want the system to provide one suggestion for your demand for that entire week. So that's where you can set a lot accumulation period. So again, if I've got an order, I need 10 on Monday, 10 on Tuesday, 10 on Wednesday. If I indicated here that my lot accumulation period was 1 week, it's going to tell me to create an order that's due on the Monday for 30 so that it can cover the demand of that entire week. So the key thing with planning that I can't stress enough is that it's dumb and dutiful. So there's lots of fields and planning setups that you guys can leverage, but how they interact with one another, how they interact with the different reordering policies that you've selected can be very different. So typically a good idea would be to pilot in a pilot company or a test database, engage with a partner on running different pilot scenarios and really understanding what those fields do so that you can make sure that this is set up so that the suggestions that it gives you are smart and really powerful for you in terms of your planning. Thank you as always for watching our videos. Please click here to follow our channel or here for more great videos.